All right, so first wanted to kind of go through a little bit of introduction stuff here. So again, thank you to our sponsors, Legacy Title, the Weston Team, Hearth and Home Inspection, Premier Insurance, Flow Photography, and Movers and Stagers Staging Company. So thank you guys. This event kept growing. More and more people kept being interested and wanting to learn about it, so we had to upgrade our location. And that obviously costs more money and takes more time to plan. And so sponsors have been very helpful in putting this on for us. So thank you to all of our sponsors. And then we're being hosted today by the Ready Agent Real Estate School. Who has heard of the Ready Agent Real Estate School before today? All right, not everybody. So Ready Agent Real Estate School is a unique licensing school. We are a subscription style licensing. So for your post-license and your pre-license, it is $29 a month to obtain your pre-license and post-license education. And so most real estate schools are $350, $450, $500, up to $800 if you buy them all together. So we are $29 a month. So if you finish it in 30 days, it's $29 a month to get your license. So anyone you know getting your license, or if you need your post-license or your CEs, come to the Ready Agent Real Estate School. So the agenda, what we're going to do is we have two panels and then a Q&A at the end. So we're going to have about a 40-minute panel in the beginning, 40-minute panel in the middle, and then about a 30 or so minute Q&A session with all the panelists in the end. There's so much going on with this NAR settlement stuff and what's changing, what's not. And I try to simplify things as much as I can and illustrate them. I'm a very visual person. So I try to illustrate what's happening and what the actual changes are, what's actually happening. So hopefully the panelists in the back, we can either make fun of me when this is over or applaud me for it. So currently the way buyer compensation works is a listing broker and a seller sign a listing agreement. The listing agreement and the listing agent and buyer agent commission is negotiated on the listing agreement up front. That listing broker inputs that information into the MLS. The offer of compensation goes into the MLS, and the buyer agent sees on the MLS how much money is that seller or that listing agent going to contribute to my commission. And then the buyer sometimes gets a buyer broker agreement. Sometimes they get that agreement at the time of the offer. Sometimes they get that agreement up front, or sometimes they don't get it at all. So this is how it currently operates. Is that a fair, panelists in the back? Is this fair? Kind of, he says. Okay. So here's what's changing. This is it. It's my understanding. We're going to talk more about it. This is it right here. Offer of compensation is no longer entered into the MLS. That is now NAR is outlawing or prohibiting that activity. So now, if a buyer's broker wants to know if there's an offer of compensation, they have to pick up the phone and call or text the listing agent. That is now how they learn what their offer of compensation is, if there is an offer of compensation. The other change is the buyer-broker agreement is no longer in dotted lines. It is a hard line now, which means it is required. We'll talk more about when it's required, how it's required, what's required inside of it. But this is the main changes that are going on with the NAR. Again, we'll talk more detail about it. Obviously, there's a ton more detail in this. But if you're watching the news, reading articles, this is what the changes look like. And so there's a lot going on, depending on what you're reading, where you're reading it, if you're reading it. Maybe you're just reading Facebook page comments. This is what everyone looks like. And so today, this is our last visual, but with more conversation, I want to get people here. All right? And so the difference between these two people is going to be their knowledge of what's going on. What is actually happening, right? We don't want to be that guy, we want to be this guy. And so uncertainty creates paralysis. If I don't know what's happening, I won't take any action. If I don't know, some people are afraid to take action if they don't know everything. In this industry, you have to take action even though you don't know everything. But especially if you're worried, man, I don't want to get in trouble, I don't want to get fined, I don't want to lose my license, and so on. So we're going to get you here, hopefully, by educating you on what's actually happening, what top agents are doing with all these changes, and what we can do, can't do, and how we should actually be practicing going forward. So I'm going to bring up our panelists. In the meantime, if you have not got on here yet, scan this now. I want everyone in the top part of that, right here, enter a word right here. I want everyone to enter one word that they think of when they think of what all's happening with NAR. So I don't know if that one's not working or not. So enter one word that you think of when you think of NAR, and I hope we have some people do it, because while we're sitting down and introducing everyone, we're going to pull up, here we go. Erin, thank you for this suggestion. This was Erin's suggestion. I thought it was really cool. Okay, so our panelists here for the first section is going to be Jace White, the General Counsel for Oklahoma Association of Realtors, Angelena Harris, the President of the Board for the MLS Oklahoma City, MLSOK, and Bryan Hutchinson, the CEO of Oklahoma Association of Realtors. So as far, all these changes are NAR related. These are our state representatives for the for the Association of Realtors. So I'm going to keep that up here. We'll talk more. Okay, there's some colorful ones up there. So this is good. Okay, you'll have to power that on. Perfect. Not your first rodeo. All right. Okay, so everything that has happened up until very recently, everyone's just been talking about all the changes. What's happening in the future? What do we need to do? What are the new stipulations? There hadn't been a whole lot of conversation of like what happened. What happened in the lawsuits? What happened with how we got here? How did this lawsuit come about? How did it get a guilty verdict? All that stuff. And so Bryan, I went to an event when he was speaking out, and he had a really, really good explanation of kind of how we got here, what happened, and then so I'm going to have you start off with, tell me, how did we get here, Bryan?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the invite first. Industry gets disrupted in three ways, right? When you have an industry you're involved in, you're always looking at governmental intervention, venture capitalism, and litigation. And for the past, 130 years, outside forces have really been trying to figure out how to affect the real property industry. The real property industry makes up 20% of our GDP in our country. It's one of the strongest pillars of what drives our economy, what keeps us moving forward. And if anybody has ever watched HGTV, you know that all you have to do is go to a house, unlock the door, open it up, show it, you get paid, 3 to 10% commission, the heavens open up, the doves come down singing hallelujah, and there's no work at all involved in real property, right? You all know that. Everybody here knows that, right? Well, we know that's no further than truth, but nonetheless, there's been this quest to disrupt our industry. And NAR's done a really good job, I think, in helping protect members for a long time. This is really the first time in about 25 years we found ourselves in a precarious place that creates change like this that's based on a non-governmental or a non-VC type of injection. And that's what's happened. People have looked for the opportunity. The environment politically and economically are both ripe right now and they were 3 years ago, for injection of both additional funding and litigation, the third tier of that stool. And that's effectively what happened across the country. Law firms backed by venture capitals, backed by other entities, found plaintiffs to create this mechanism that said, basically, because NAR is a volunteer organization and it's run by volunteers on its board of directors, and because those same volunteers are involved in the practice of real property, the policies they make on this side must be in violation of antitrust because it directly affects their business. That's the crux of the lawsuits, both on the buyer side and the seller side. So the one that everybody's talking about right now, the case out of Missouri, was a case that got filed representing the sellers rather, saying sellers must have paid too much money because they never had the ability to negotiate their commission, and they had to pay for all of this, both sides of the transaction, and therefore it's unfair, and we unduly took money from them. Now, most of you in this room would probably understand that that's completely fictitious, right? And one of the questions I'm often asked is, why the heck wouldn't NAR get up and just make the argument and say, whoa, wait a minute. Let's talk about a few things. Like, let's talk about the fact that we used to have sub-agency commission, and about 20 years ago or so, in agreement with the federal government. We changed from sub-agency commission to buyer's agency commission so that there was more transparency and that the buyer actually had somebody representing him. You would think we would have made that argument. And people are mad that we didn't make that argument. And you would have thought that NAR would have made the argument that said cooperation is really good, because when you have a cooperative market, it brings a higher audience to the table, and a higher audience should translate into a faster sale for more money. And you would have thought that we would have made that argument. And you would have thought that we would make the argument that it's really good for those classes that need to be protected, the portions of our society that don't have deep pockets, that can't pay for that buyer's agency out of their pocket. They can't come up with that extra money. The first-time home buyer who's relying on concessions to get the deal done. The person who's the first-generation home buyer, who's coming out of the inner city or who's coming from the farm fields and is trying for the first time to buy into the American dream. And man, I've heard my members all across the country have said, God, why wouldn't NAR make that ruling? Why wouldn't they argue that on our behalf? How could this jury be so blinded to it? Let me tell you what you haven't heard. What you haven't heard is that in that courtroom, one man wearing a black robe made a ruling prior to the case ever taking place. And his ruling was what was called, Jace, correct me, a pro se ruling. I'm not an attorney licensed to practice law in the state of Oklahoma, by the way. He made what was called a pro se ruling. And what a pro se ruling basically says is, I as the judge am predetermining some facts. And the facts that I'm predetermining, essentially, my words, not his words, cooperation is wrong, the plaintiff's argument is effectively right, and no reference to it can be made in your defense. You haven't heard that when you've turned on Inman, have you? When you've picked up the Wall Street Journal or read the New York Times slam pieces, none of you in this room have probably heard that. A ruling was made that said, NAR, you cannot defend yourself. We're taking it on face value. We're not going to waste the time of the Missouri court system and its resources. You can take it up on appeal. And at that very moment in time, we lost the lawsuit. At that very moment in time, it really became the question, how do we best protect our members? And that's what it is. And you can't hear that from NAR yet because the settlement's not done. And you can't hear that in Inman because that doesn't bring an audience, which is what media is about, right? Producing an audience for the advertisers, not about sharing the truth. And you're not reading that in the Wall Street Journal and New York Times, but that, Brett, that's how we got here. Angelena, Jace, you agree? Yeah. I'm going to pass the microphone now. Y'all done here for me.
Jace, this next one. Excuse me, I keep wanting to clear my throat, but this thing's so close that I'm going to break everyone's eardrums. Okay. I'm going to go back to our slideshow. I want to talk about timelines, what everyone has to do and by when, and talk a little bit about that. Okay, so terms of the agreement. What did NAR agree to for us? What did it cost us, and what are we doing going forward now?
Sure. So substantively, you're looking at a $418 million payment. I've heard it described as the best negotiation that's ever occurred in real estate in the United States. You've got a $5.5 billion conceivable judgment being reduced down to $418 million. It's expensive, but you're welcome. What does that do? It protects 1 million plus realtors from any liability associated with these seller compensation lawsuits. It protects the associations, both at the local and the state levels. It protects the realtor-owned MLSs, and it gives others an opportunity to opt into the agreement, such as MLSs that are not owned by realtor organizations, large brokerages who had a transaction volume over $2 billion back in 2022. Again, those are not by default covered, but it gives them a chance to opt into it. So that's what was paid, and what did it get? Again, it got that release of liability, but it also entailed some of their practice changes, okay? It requires the removal of offers of compensation from the MLS. That's the big one I know is going to be talked about later today. It requires buyer-broker agreements to be entered into prior to a buyer touring a home when you're working with one. And it requires compliance by all of the members of NAR, anybody who seeks to be protected by the agreement. It requires complying with the practice changes in paragraph 58, 6 through 10. Highly encourage everybody in this room to go read the agreement and really hone in on those. And it's because every person in this room has an obligation to be able to show proof that they're complying with those things. If you're ever asked later to provide proof of that compliance, if you don't have it, there's a risk that you could not be protected from liability, and no one in this room wants that. So again, that's not getting talked about
Like
a ton.
you individually?
Yeah.
Me individually
Yes.
could be like a...
Yeah. So really, I'm serious. Read that agreement. I know it's long. It's worth your time to read it and really hone in on what do I have to do to be a released party under the agreement and be protected. So that's substantively what we've. Those are the key terms. Obviously, it's a 100-page document. Okay, there's a lot more than that, but key points. That's what we're looking at.
In preparation for the event, I spent a lot of time right here, NAR.realtor/the facts. Tons of frequently asked questions, tons of PDFs, all kinds of stuff. All this kind of came from there. So what I did is you can go to the FAQs on there and just Control F and search for words like open house or compensation, and you can go find FAQs and find some guidance on some of those. So ask your broker, ask your leadership, go here. But they've done a really good job putting out a tremendous amount of resources, a lot. So, okay. So talk more about the timeline of the statement. I have it behind you if you want to reference it.
Sure. No, yeah, I think this is available from NAR's website.
Right.
So the timeline we're looking at was all predicated on when the plaintiffs were going to file a motion asking for the court to preliminarily approve this settlement agreement. That happened back in April. And in the wake of that filing, we're in a 60-day period where those various entities that are not covered automatically can have a chance to opt in. It also, again, is a requirement for every MLS, even realtor-owned MLSs, to sign one of the appendices to the agreement that agrees to comply with the practice changes and therefore get protection under the agreement. So we're in that period right now. Deadline for that right now is June 18. After that, we expect the class notice, nationwide class notice, to go out in midsummer. Between then and November, there's going to be significant briefing on the issue. I believe the hearing for final approval is currently set for November 26th, and we're expecting a ruling from the judge either late November or December on whether the agreement will be approved. So that's what we're looking at timing.
And this is something important to understand. These changes are happening, whether it's agreed to or not. And so that was my first kind of reaction initially, is like, well, hold on, guys, we don't even know if this is going to get agreed to, but the judge is going to approve it or the court's going to approve it. But these are happening. Brian has something to comment on that.
Yeah, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but let me correct you.
Okay.
They may not, because there is another entity of this three-legged stool: litigation, venture capitalism, the government.
DOJ.
And the DOJ has the opportunity to sign off on this, and the DOJ, this is an amazing thing to wrap your head around, is we were just about to settle with the DOJ like we do every 20 years, 15 to 20 years, we do a settlement with them, and that's how we drive our industry forward. It's accepted, it's our practice, what we do. We were just about to do that, and the DOJ wants exactly the opposite. And this isn't getting talked about right now, and you need to be aware of it. The DOJ wants complete and total transparency publicly. They want everybody to know who's getting paid, how much, and how they're getting paid before the transaction happens. And this settlement does exactly the opposite, right? And so there's a chance that DOJ weighs in on this, and we're back to the drawing board. There's also a chance that we end up in a position, God help me, I'm going to say this, and please don't kill me, Angelena, for our MLSs. But there's also a place that we end up where we enter into a settlement agreement and DOJ still says, nah, you got to figure something else out. So just be careful about that. Follow these, number one advice, follow these sites. Go to facts, competition, NAR.competition or NAR.facts. Don't watch Inman, and for God's sake, stay out of the Wall Street Journal. Sorry.
Yeah. So to the changes, two terms, and when we talk legally, words mean things. And so touring is a word and working with is a term, because you have to get buyer broker agreements prior to touring, and if you are working with, and what does that look like? And so do you have any guidance along that? I have some questions, but do you have any guidance along those?
Sure. insofar as I can, right? Because I don't have a crystal ball. What I can say is the agreement requires that if you are working with a buyer, you are required to get a signed buyer broker agreement before that buyer tours a home, okay? The order of events connotes that you can be working with a buyer, but you don't need the buyer broker agreement written yet until you get to that place where you're going to be touring, okay? The context in which I've seen this come up most often is, hey, I'm a listing broker and I'm hosting an open house. How do I handle that situation? Well, if you think about it, when you're holding an open house for your seller, okay, you're clearly in furtherance of and serving the interests of the seller. If an unrepresented buyer walks into an open house, they're allowed to do that under the settlement agreement because you're not working with that buyer, if that makes sense. Now, if you start having conversations with that buyer about what it can look like for you to represent them as well, you got to be careful because you're now in a house working with a buyer and you don't have an agreement yet. So general advice is, again, the sooner the better, okay? If you believe that you're going to be working with a buyer, the earliest that you can get that buyer broker agreement signed and in writing, that's going to protect you. So that's as far as just best practice, yeah.
So this is a personal question for my own business and my own agents. So some agents will reach out to other brokerages and host open houses for other brokerages. If I'm in another house hosting an open house on behalf of the seller, on behalf of the brokerage, on behalf of the seller, is that an instance where I shouldn't do that because it could be construed as I'm helping that buyer tour? Am I working with that buyer? Does that make sense? It's not my brokerage's listing.
Sure, I understand. I think, again, that's going to be a really fact-specific question. I would argue that, if you've been retained by the listing broker to go work that open house, again, that's all in furtherance of the seller. So that you're going to fall into that rubric. You're providing service for that side of the transaction. Okay. And unless and until you truly start working with a buyer, you're not going to need a buyer broker agreement.
Angelena, you're the police here. Is that accurate? Is that how the policing entity will view it?
I believe that we're going to look to see if you have a written agreement with a buyer. It doesn't necessarily have to be a buyer broker service agreement. It can be a written agreement with a buyer. And I think that that's an important thing because each broker could have their own written agreement. They don't have to use a mandated state form. They don't have to use an MLS form. They just have to have a written agreement with a buyer. And that could be a showing agreement. We were talking about it this morning. I was on the OREC call for the buyer broker service agreement that they are changing. As MLS, we have 4 people on there just to see what we need to add on our side whenever this all goes into place. And so as the police, I believe that like any other thing, we typically will have you guys hit the police button. We're going to have some technologies in place to do so. We have data checker already. We're going to get with our vendors to see who can actually police, how we can police it better. But normally we're going to request a copy of your buyer, your written agreement with your buyer. As MLS staff will do that in order to find out if you are actually within the confines of our settlement agreement. Because you don't want to try to circumvent the settlement agreement because you will not be covered under that settlement agreement. And that's very important. Those that are trying to go out and do things like putting them in different places in the MLS and stuff like that, that is circumventing the agreement that we agreed to. And with that, you will be fined a high fine. We have not approved the fines yet, but they will be exorbitant. They're going to be a high fine because it is a settlement agreement. And so just keep that in mind. But also on the written agreement, it's important to understand is that we are maxed out on the amount that we put on that agreement. So if the seller pays more, we can't take that amount if it's more than what we agreed to with our buyer. This is all about transparency with your buyer. And so make sure that if you want more, you put it on your agreement before you go out there and you show that property. And from my understanding, we can go below that, like we can negotiate lower, but we can't go up. And so make sure that you get what you want at the beginning from your buyer. And that's an important thing to understand in this whole thing. And I was on a CMLS call yesterday and the question came up, well, can we amend that buyer agreement? NAR was also on the call. They have not come to a definitive answer on that. And so, I think that kind of takes away from the transparency that the DOJ wants us to have. And so I could see that being a big problem if we all of a sudden say, well, Mr. Buyer, we agreed to this amount, but now we're going to go take whatever the seller says, right? So I think that we need to be really careful about how we're doing those things and trying to circumvent the settlement. Does that answer your question, Bryan?
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Yeah, please.
I know we're pressed on time, but
You're good.
I want to just say, again, there's three-legged stool. On the legislative side of that, we just got Senate Bill 1920 signed by the governor. My team, I've got a team in Washington. We're working on 81 specific topics in Washington right now. I've got a team here at the Capitol. We had victory on every single bill we put through the House, through the Congress this year, by the way, except for one that we pulled ourselves. Senate Bill 1920 you're going to see a change to the mandatory disclosure of commission in that. And some of you aren't going to like it. I'm going to tell you right now, you're not going to like it, but you can say thank you later. That's in there to create a level playing field. So whether you are a member of the National Association of Realtors or not, whether you're bound by the terminology of the settlement or you're not, every real estate agent in the state of Oklahoma will be required to play on the same field. We believe next year, in next Senate session, we couldn't make the deadline this year. We're waiting for some we had it done, and then the settlement dropped and we had to change it. But we believe that the Senate, the Congressional House next year, the legislature next year in Oklahoma will make the utilization of a buyer's agency agreement uniform to all licensed real estate agents in the state of Oklahoma, so that our members are playing on the same field and all consumers know what to expect, regardless if they're using a realtor or just someone who got their license.
Angelena, we can't put compensation in the MLS anymore. I know there's a lot of people on the internet trying to get cute about where we can put it and what we can do and can't do. How should buyer agents learn what their offered compensation offer is?
What the settlement says is that it cannot be placed anywhere in the MLS, period. What that means is no showing time, no disclosures, no remarks, nowhere in our system. We have a CRM now. You cannot put it through our CRM. We have validated that with our legal counsel. It cannot be put anywhere in our system. It can't be sent out from our system through IDX feeds. It can't be to any aggregated websites. So I've seen the cute little national portals, some of the national people coming out and saying that they're going to create a website that we can all feed to and we can put our compensation in. That is also not allowed. For one thing, they'd have to get the MLS data, which they can't get, and we have the best data, so I don't know how they're going to get it unless they input it from each brokerage having to do that. But we are not allowed to feed any of that from our MLS system. And so I was on CMLS yesterday, and they said that somebody took a picture of a pillow and put it on their MLS with the amount of compensation being offered. So it is they're definitely getting cute. I had somebody argue with me about on Facebook about the whole showing time, and they disagreed with me. And I'm like, you can disagree, but I'm the one with the antitrust MLS attorney on my side, and you're not. So just keep in mind that we will have to police that, and we're going to have heavy fines with that. The way that it can be, and I'm going to put on my broker hat. I can't put on the MLS hat right now.
Okay.
So on the broker side, I have read the settlement. MLS cannot dictate how you advertise outside of the MLS. We cannot dictate that. What I can say from a broker point of view is, from reading the settlement, is that it can be on your individual websites. You can put your own listings on there. With your compensation, that is allowed. However, you cannot add my listings to your website with my compensation, or any other brokerage's listings with their compensation. So you can still do that. You can still do Facebook. You can still do your own CRMs. You can still do all of that. That has not changed. The only difference is that it is now not allowed to be placed on the MLS system for dissemination. That is what has changed. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Yeah. That is what we're seeing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not worth it.
When you start that, you go outside of the scope
Yes.
of your broker, and you are no longer covered. Here, individually,
Right.
you're no longer covered. Don't get silly.
Yeah.
Not worth
and
it.
don't do it. You're not covered under the settlement, and you want to be covered in the settlement because we are covered from sellers suing us over compensation for the next 7 years after the opt-in. And so that is every brokerage in our MLS system once the MLS decides whether they're going to opt in or not. Okay. So that is something that's really important to understand is we are covered for that 7 years. And as long as you're an MLS member and we have opted in, then you are covered as long as you follow within those guidelines that we have put forth in our MLS rules and regulations from the NAR. So as long as you do that, you are fine. So I think that that's important for you guys to understand.
So a buyer's agent will learn of their offer of compensation potentially through the broker's website, the listing broker's website.
Sure.
Or picking up the phone and calling them.
They have to go old school. They have to make the phone
Right.
call. They have to text. They have to send emails. Like
Yeah.
they have to go other places besides that. Or they can just send an offer in with request for compensation and hope for the best. Like that's another way you can do it. And that might even be one of the safest ways to do it, honestly. Instead of having to call and ask and take time to do that, just send it with your offer for a request for compensation, or have your buyer request for that to be paid for them by the seller. I think that that's also one of the options that you can have, and it's definitely some practices that some of the brokers I know that are going to do that.
How about individual marketing on an individual property? So I have a house listed. I want to create a listing flyer and put it on social media or open house.
Fine.
Okay, so I can put
It's not
seller
on MLS.
offering. Okay.
The biggest thing is it is not on the MLS system.
Okay.
So as long as it's not on the MLS system, you are a broker. You're allowed to market your property. As long as OREC is okay with it, then you are fine.
Okay, so marketing it individually. Okay.
Yeah, as long as you're within OREC guidelines, then you should be fine.
Okay. We got 3 minutes here. I'm going to try to cram in one more question.
Okay.
Jace, so the policy or the rule stipulation states that in the buyer compensation or in the buyer agreement, commission must be ascertainable and not open-ended. So we kind of talked about that a little bit already. Can we structure it? We had a little bit of this conversation when we last met. Can we structure it as an either-or type compensation, such as the buyer is going to compensate me X dollars or X, whichever is less or whichever is greater, or can it be a variable compensation?
Yeah, I think that's an open question at this point. So I can only give you an opinion, and but I would say that if you're going to make it variable, it needs to be discernible. If it's a flat rate versus whatever's being offered by the seller, it needs to specifically say whatever's being offered by the seller.
Yeah, right.
And if that's a finite amount, okay, then it should be, in my opinion, readily ascertainable, such that it should be okay. Now, if you get more vague than that, you run into this argument that, okay, maybe this isn't as clear as it needs to be, and is in violation of the practice changes.
So whatever is offered by the seller, is that ascertainable, open-ended?
I would say that's ascertainable because, again, you can call the seller's agent and see what's being offered.
Okay.
You know, for cooperative compensation. So
Okay.
that is discernible.
Brian's unsure. Okay.
We both disagree with you. Yeah. We disagree.
I disagree frequently.
Yeah. No, I was on CMLS yesterday and that actually came up and they said that they would consider that open-ended. And so they're actually on the new buyer broker agreement so far. It's not finalized with the Real Estate Commission. They are taking away the box that says the listing broker or the seller completely out of the new buyer broker agreement. That will not be in there because it could give an opportunity for a realtor member to accidentally check the box and be in violation of the settlement. And so that's something to just be acknowledgement of. So do you have anything on that as well?
There's a cap. You can't get paid more than the cap.
Yeah.
That cap has to be in that agreement. Don't worry about it yet. We're working the details out. We'll have them, and when they're out, there will be massive amounts of training from all of the MLSs in the state, as well as the local associations.
So at the bottom line, it has to be clear. Buyer has to know what you're getting paid.
Yeah, and just real quick on this. So our board is voting next week. And so after that, we'll know for sure if we've opted into Appendix B, which is where we are covered under the settlement. Once we do that, we have till June 18th to opt into that settlement. And then after that, we have until August 17th to make implementation changes. So really your biggest dates are going to be, we're going to do our June 18th. We're going to send out, just a letter stating what we have decided. And then once we do that, we will send out those dates via email to all of our membership. And then that way you guys will know where we're going with that. And then one of the reasons why I was on the OREC call today was to see what was inside that agreement with OREC so that we could decide on the MLS side, what forms do we need, because we are the policemen of this whole situation, what we need to have in place so that our brokers can be in compliance with the settlement.
That's good. All right, we are at the end of panel 1. Time is flying by. We have 3 or 4 more topics that I want to get to, and so throw questions up if you have questions, and we'll get to them in the Q&A section. But thank you guys to panel 1, Jace, Bryan, and Angelena. Okay, so next panel, and Erin and Tara, I'll have you come up here. Erin Catron got a real estate license in 2007 in Florida. She moved to Oklahoma in 2016 and started her real estate team and has been in the top 1% of agents since then. She now runs an independent brokerage, Erin Catron and team, Erin Catron and Company, with 30 agents. In 2023, she sold 448 transactions for $121 million. Year to date, she's done 169 for $50 million, which is on pace for 455 and 143 million in volume. And as far back as I can go in the MLS, she has sold over 2,000 homes in her career. Very, very impressive. Largest team leader out of Tulsa, Oklahoma. Tara Levinson is the largest team leader here in Oklahoma City. Tara has been licensed since 2004 and has consistently been in the top 1% of real estate agents in Oklahoma City for almost 2 decades. Her and her husband Peter run a team of 20 agents and an independent brokerage of over 60 agents. In 2023, she sold 605 transactions for $154 million. And year to date, she's done 246 for $62 million. She's on pace for 700 transactions, $168 million. But I went back in 2021, I think you did over 900 transactions. Yeah, which is incredible. So the other cool part is, since she's been licensed, she's sold 6,577 houses, which is a very impressive feat. So, lots of experience, lots of consumer engagement up here, right? Hundreds of transactions a year. And so they have their finger on the pulse of what buyers are wanting, sellers are wanting, what are they saying, what objections are we getting, what are they going to be doing going forward, because they want to protect these 400, 500, 600, 900 transactions. We want to get more going forward. So I was very excited that they were both willing, again, very generous with their time. So thank you guys very much. So something we kind of both talked about before, and it kind of be a little bit of a theme through our conversation. So I think it's important, again, don't be this guy. Don't fall victim to the hype. The old adage, external factors don't change how much business you do, just how you do business. And so anything that's coming down the pipe or any changes that are happening, you just have to pivot and find your way moving forward. And so that's something that we both talked about a lot when we were meeting. So Tara had a really interesting story, anecdote. Tell me about 2007. You had mentioned, tell me kind of, what we talked about.
So we were talking about lending in 2007. Whenever I got into real estate, we grew every single year. This is actually the first year we're down. So, and I think it's just because the market's different in interest rates. But whenever I first got into real estate, I didn't know that interest rates were bad. I didn't know what they were. I just didn't ever pay attention to the news that it was supposed to be bad. So I just kept moving forward and kept moving forward. And we would just figure it out. I would just talk to the client and I would say, do you really want to get in this house? And they'd say, yes, I do. Okay, so if you really want to get into this house, I'm really going to get you into this house. And we'd figure out a way to do it. And I think that's the way it's going to be now. I mean, if the buyers want to get into this house, we're going to have to figure out a way to do it. Yeah, and that's kind of, like you said, you didn't realize you were down. You went out and you sold, 70, 80 transactions in that first year or two you're in there. And yeah, so that's, again, keeping your head down, going to work. It can't be replaced. Erin, remind me of, let's see. So when Erin and I first got on a conversation and I said, hey, I'm having this panel, here's kind of what we're talking about. Again, she said, I'm not really an expert in the NAR stuff. And again, I thought that was, we started talking about what business looks like. And so it's not going to control her business. So what's your kind of mindset strategy going forward with everything going on?
So pretty much with everything in my life, I'm like, hey, let's just figure this out as we go. Maybe that's not a great way to do it, but that's how I've done it. So kind of similar to what we went through in COVID. How many of you guys were in business during COVID, like in 2020? Okay. So you guys remember it was like this big shakeup and it was scary and everybody was going, I don't even know how we're going to do business. Are we essential? Are we non-essential?
Yeah.
Are we dead? Are we done? And kind of the same mentality came in when NAR, it was spring break this year. I was out of town and all of this noise started happening and my phone was blowing up and everybody's calling and going, what's happening? And I thought at this time, I joke because I'm like, I had a freak out. You know, I took 24 hours to freak out a little bit. And then I thought, what is changing for us right now? Really nothing. And what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to get better at a few things and we're going to have to figure this out as we go. But number one, we're not going to panic. We don't even have all the information. I still don't have all the information. Even sitting here today, I was learning things that I thought, well, that makes sense, or that's going to suck, or that's going to be different. And what I think is important for us to remember is that through every phase that we go through, whether it's the lending crisis, interest rates, COVID, NAR, this is our industry. This is what we do. This is like just, I mean, I don't want to say business as usual because I think that people are saying business as usual, which is not true, but it's a pivot and we'll figure it out. And I don't think that anybody needs to think like this is the worst time to get into real estate or we're panicking or it's going to be completely different. Knowing your value, being able to articulate that value and having transparency is going to be better for all of us. And so the more that we can understand that that's really what this is about, and it's not necessarily about what's changing or what are the restrictions, it's about how do we do better in our business. So I am not an NAR expert. Nor do I want to be. That's why we have you guys and you're in our corner and we need to be looking at those advisors. But as industry partners, we need to be focusing on our business. And so that's where I would say that I'm not an NAR expert. I don't know a lot about the settlement. I know that I'm going to be paying attention to make sure that I'm in compliance and making sure that I'm protecting my business. But other than that, we need to just crush it and continue to crush it. So that's the plan.
Yeah, that's what Tara said, something similar, like, I'm going to keep doing what I do, just make sure I stay legal. Yeah. Yeah. Peter's job is to stay legal. So Tara, everyone is kind of focused on, the conversation I've been hearing a lot is articulate your value to the buyer. That's everyone's, how do you do this? What value you're providing, all that. I think equally as important is the other side. How are sellers, or how are agents talking to sellers? How are they articulating buyer value to sellers? And what conversations are you having around NAR, around commission, around the noise? What conversations are you having with sellers?
So when we were talking about commission, we were talking about when people go into listing presentation, and I'm a heavy listing agent. I mean, I carry a lot of listings at a time. So I was telling Brett that we don't actually ever really have to negotiate our commission with sellers. Most of the time, if we have to negotiate our commission with the sellers, we bring it up. We're like, oh yeah, because we're usually, and I'm not allowed to say a percent, we're usually this percentage of a brokerage and we don't reduce our commission. It rarely happens. Rarely the seller brings it up like, hey, reduce your commission. So what I was telling Brett, I said, I don't think we're going to have a lot of conversations with sellers and buyers about this. I think the conversations are going to happen in our industry. I think this is going to be an opportunity for you to be a really good agent and work really well with everybody in this industry, or it's going to be a really good opportunity for you to be an asshole. Because I think there's going to be a lot of assholes in this industry that are going to show up and they're going to start cutting people out of commissions. I'm already seeing it right now. I think that people are going to start asking for buyer brokerage agreements to see how much you were offered. I think people are going to, I don't even know if you can, but ask for listing agreements to see what was offered on the listing agreement. So I don't think much is really going to change except the extra form that we have to fill out or get signed ahead of time. I think that us as an industry, we're still going to pay commissions. And I think sellers are really, really rarely going to bring it up that they have to pay the buyer's agent.
Yeah, so another reason this is such an interesting dynamic, Tara is really, 60, 70% listing side. Erin is a lot larger on the buyer side. So Erin, what, if anything, is changing about your buyer broker process? Kind of how you onboard a buyer to your agents. talk about different versions or terms for your buyer broker. How are you articulating? Is anything changing with what you're telling your buyers?
Absolutely. And this is something that we are already doing on our team, because we're gonna be prepared for the change, and we're not gonna wait until they actually say, hey, this is what you're going to have to do, and then it's gonna be policed and you're gonna be fined and all this fun stuff. So a couple of the things that we're doing that I think you could take with you today. We want to make sure that we are being transparent with our buyers. And easy way that we've kind of implemented recently is that we meet with a lot of buyers for the first time at a home. So sometimes you're meeting them for the first time, and it's going to be difficult if you're not used to asking for them to sign an agreement when you're meeting them for the first time. So something that we decided to go ahead and implement is we're putting together a goodie bag. And it's just a really, really easy thing that's going to have a bottled water, some chips or granola bars, and then it's going to have some information about the home buying process. It's going to have your buyer's guide in it. It's going to show the value that you're bringing to them. And then it's also going to have whatever you're wanting to call it that we're supposed to be calling it. Right now, we're calling it a touring agreement. And so a touring agreement is something that's just saying, listen, we are just meeting you. I don't know you, lady in the front row, but I think that I want to work with you, and I'll definitely take your money if you'll give it to me. So trust me. Here's how I'm going to build trust. And so even just little things like that, I would encourage you guys to find something that sets you apart, and then go ahead and start implementing a process and get that going right away. Just because I think when the date finally hits that this is something that we have to do, it always shocks me because agents like you and I probably got into business about the same time. I got in in the mortgage crisis. I was in Florida. It was terrible. All it was short sales and foreclosures. And I had no idea that was hard because that's just what I knew. And so it's the same thing. If you are just now getting into this industry, congratulations. It's not going to be hard because it's just the way that you're going to do business. So start finding ways that you can just articulate your value again, show why somebody wants to work with you, and then it's not going to be awkward to say, hey, by the way, every other agent that you're meeting with or that you have met with at a property would ask you the same thing. And I like what you said about evening the playing field, just because I think if that becomes how we have to do it, they're going to be ready for that. So we're a lot more nervous about these changes than, like you said, sellers. They're probably not going to ask these questions, and buyers are probably not going to be questioning it. So that would be my little tidbit, is just have something that sets you apart and that you're showing your value.
That's something I have to keep kind of almost reminding myself. The vast majority of just consumers, just people, lay people, have no idea what's happening.
No.
They, maybe 20% know there's a lawsuit going on. I'm sure there's numbers out there, so I'm probably speaking out of turn here, but the vast majority of people get all of their real estate information from real estate professionals. So they're gonna come with maybe something they read or Googled, but they're gonna get information from us. So how we present it is very important. And that's, we talk more about having different touring agreements, buyer broker agreements, buyer relationship agreements based on the situation you have with that buyer. If you meet them for the first time, maybe it's a paid lead and you're meeting for the first time, that agreement might be different than the agreement your best friend calling and saying, hey, I want to buy a house. You give them the full-on agreement that has everything on it and it's 90 days or whatever. And this first one I met online, maybe it's 24 hours, maybe it's 7 days, maybe it's 30 days, whatever. And it's just kind of an introduction to that relationship with that consumer. And then talking about articulating, me personally, you should never have to talk about your value. You should never have to say the words, my value, or I'm worth, or anything like that. If you have to, you're already not worth what you're asking for. So the best thing you do is just be valuable to the consumer. Do valuable things. Do things that provide documents, provide information, provide goodie bags, whatever it is. Be valuable to them, and they're not even going to want you to explain what your value is because you're showing them, right? More is caught than taught. They're going to see you being valuable instead of you having to sit down and say, hey, look how valuable I am. So just be valuable to consumers. So Tara, you kind of touched on this already. I'm looking down. I feel like I'm yelling into the microphone. Are we good out there? Okay, all right. You're right next to it.
I mean, I'm right next to
Yeah.
it. No, you're fine.
Okay, Tara, so you already mentioned a little bit. Talk about the importance of inter-agent relationships. How important is it going to be that buyer's agents and listing agents have good relationships?
I mean, how many people in this room has done a cross sale with somebody on my team? at some point.
Yeah, a lot.
So how many times do you think I've had a seller or buyer come back to me? Maybe 2 or 3 times in their lifetime. So I'm going to work with you guys a lot more than I'm going to work with one client. So you are my client. So I'm going to make sure that you're taken care of first as a buyer's agent on the other side. I'm not going to ever just be like, hey, I'm keeping 4 and I'm paying you 2 or anything like that. And I think that that's how we have to all be like that. And as long as we do that and we do really well and we still work well together, then it's going to be fine. It's whenever the agents come out there, and we're going to see it a lot. I mean, that's really, if you guys are going to have to turn from people opening doors to true salespeople. And who you're really selling yourself to is going to be another agent, like why they should give you a portion of the commission that's been offered. I do think that sellers are not going to balk at it too much. You will have a couple of them, just like you have the people that negotiate your commission, but I don't think sellers are going to stop paying buyers agents commissions. I think that they're going to still want to do it. There's so many industries that our industry touches, and if those, like I was thinking about Showtime when they were talking about showing time, does that mean Showtime goes away? Because if we're calling now, if we have to call and ask if they're going to pay a commission, do we really need Showtime anymore? I mean, so that's a whole leg of business that goes away for an industry of Zillow. So that's what I think that the government hasn't looked into, is how many industries we touch, and is it going to depress the rest of the market all over?
Yeah, I think anyone who's done a fair amount of listings or been in the business for an amount of time, you start to know some of the, 90% of the business is done by 10% of the agents. There's a lot of people out there doing small amounts, but you start to run into the same names a lot if you're doing it long enough or in certain areas. And there are some names when they schedule a showing, you're like, Lazy knows some. And then there's some names when they call you and want to write an offer, you just know this is going to be good. This is going to be simple, easy. Even if something goes wrong, there's someone who's skilled, level-headed on the other end. So maintaining that relationship, and then really quickly and easily, because sometimes I've had phone calls from agents where right away it's like, hey, it's me versus you. I got to go to bat for my client, and you're just killing your client's opportunity. So very, very important to make sure that you got to be best friends with all the listing agents, and know that if you're the listing agent, that buyer's agent might have a listing soon that one of your clients want. So don't, treat them accordingly, because you might be on the other side of that very quickly.
Yeah, and we all could just make so much money that we could pay the damn fine if they fine us. How about that?
Don't listen to that in the back. That's good. I like that. Okay. So what would be a way for a buyer's agent to provide value to the listing agent, or not provide value, but articulate, why should I get my 3%? Because Tara and I were talking, we're going to negotiate 4%, 5%, 6%, whatever it is, and then it's still our cooperation agreement to determine what we want to compensate the buyer's agent. So what can a buyer's agent do to a listing agent to kind of articulate their value, that I should get the 3%, or here's what I'm asking for, or the 2%, or whatever it is? Does that question make sense? How can you provide value?
So you're asking as a buyer's agent, asking the listing agent to compensate.
Yeah.
I've got a buyer.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
I mean, does your seller want to sell their home? And helping them understand that having somebody on the other side that's going to work through, do they want to show up for all the inspections? Do they want to be the one who's guiding them through it on the lending side? I mean, I get your question.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah.
You mentioned a cover sheet.
Oh, so we have in our office that we have a cover letter that goes out to the listing agent when we present an offer, that basically, again, is just saying, here's why you would want to take, our offer over somebody else's. It's gonna not just talk about the offer in general, but why they would want to work with our team. We have layers of leadership. We have a transaction coordination team. We have a sales manager. We have a broker who is not in production, who is here looking at, everything that comes in and out. But back to what, the question is, I think Tara said it best. We are all colleagues. I don't think this is something that I don't think I have to convince you that a buyer needs a buyer's agent on the other side. Mm-hmm. Now, I think that's something that if we work with buyers and sellers, we already know that value. Mm-hmm. So I hope that we're not having to tell a listing agent, hey, you need to compensate me for the job that I'm going to do, because I would assume, and I know we're not supposed to, but I would assume that a good agent understands the value.
And hopefully is portraying
It's
that value to
different.
the
It's
seller.
different when we're talking about articulating value to the public. I think that's two totally different things, because I really believe that as professionals and colleagues, hopefully we don't have to do that. Now, what you should do is make sure that they know and that they are understanding the value that you do bring, because you want to help your client and get their offer accepted. Because how many of you guys, I don't know, we're in the Tulsa market, but we're still on hot properties in multiple offer situations. And if we can give our buyers an advantage by saying you are working with a competent agent, and we're going to let that listing agent know that we have a team working behind us, that is a value, and that is something that should be told to the listing side.
That's exactly what I was asking, and it's
Oh,
funny
good. I'm
because
glad, 'cause- okay.
it's funny because to you it's like that's how we write offers.
Right.
But I've never received here's the value I provide my clients as a buyer's agent, because that's
I can share a template if anybody.
I would.
I say that, and then I'm gonna look at Heather and go, Heather.
Let's just get. I will give that out to everybody. I'll email it out to everybody. But that's huge, because again, if an agent just met a buyer, they have very little influence over them. They don't know. It's tougher to. I say the control's not the right word. But influence that buyer, because sometimes you got to help buyers get out of their own way. You got to help sellers get out of their own way. And if buyers are the emotional person in the transaction is calling all the shots, it's going to be a rockier transaction. That's the whole purpose of a real estate agent, is that level-headed third party to help guide you through this emotional process. And so I think that's huge to provide value and say, look, here, I promise this is going to be a smooth transaction. That's what you're telling the seller and the listing agent.
I don't know, I need this, but I also think that it provides, again, the word transparency, but education is probably too strong of a word, but there are a lot of agents that don't understand contracts as well as other agents. Maybe they're newer. And so that template also goes through and is going to say, here's the outline of our offer. And here's what the purchase price is. Here's what the deposit, and it goes down through each of those, like basically highlights bullet points of what you're giving them, because you can be as savvy as you want to be and have strategies that you've influenced your buyer to be able to put in an offer. But if the listing agent doesn't understand that, it's not going to matter. So that also helps you with making sure that you're positioning yourself to the agent, to the listing agent, to know this is exactly what their offer is. We even say, hey, share this with your seller. So that way it makes their job easier. So
Yeah, that's awesome. Because if you're in a multiple offer situation, you got 2 or 3 offers and they're all similar.
Right.
You got to look for the edge. Who's the lender on all these transactions? Who is, where are they closing? What title company? I've even gone as far as to ask who the inspector is going to be on the transaction, because there's certain inspections that I don't love. And so as a listing agent, you want to try to provide value and protect your seller as much as possible. And as a buyer's agent, you can provide all that information up front, and it just gives them more comfort and can give yourself an edge. Because money doesn't always win the transaction.
Right.
Not always. I've had clients take lower offers because it was a more solid offer, or for whatever reason they liked it more. So that's exactly. I'm going to probably implement that with our offers, and I think everyone should. That's great. Just kind of, it helps your buyer, shows your buyer how strong they are. So that's really good. Let me see here. I had one. So Erin, we kind of talked a little bit, going back to how do we articulate our value to the consumer. You told me about an exercise you had your team do about writing the 100 things. So, because most, as a professional, we know a million things happen during the transaction, but to us it's more common. To the consumer, it's a million foreign things that make no sense to them. But to us, it's like, I kick it off to Chris. Chris does this, and I kick it off to lender, and they do this, whatever. So you had your team do an exercise to kind of put in their head their own value.
Right. Yeah.
Tell us what that was. Sorry.
So our office, we play a lot of games and we do a lot of contests, and we try to keep it really fun and light. So when you're going through some of these heavier things, we really want to prepare our team by doing it in a fun way, in a positive way. So how many of you guys have ever played charades? Okay, so we have a fish bowl in our office and our team meeting area, and we have different things about being on a team, or being the #1 team in Tulsa, or local lenders, our partnership with our local lender, our partnership with our local title company. And so all of these little pieces of paper are in this fishbowl. And so we'll come in and we'll have contests and go, okay, we need this side, you pick 3 people on this side, 3 people on this side. And then you're going to kind of pick one out, and you have to articulate your value. You have to pull out a piece of paper that says, I'm on the top team in Tulsa. What does that mean to a buyer? And so you have to be able to say, if I'm talking to a buyer, hey, Mr. Buyer, lucky for you, I'm on the Catron team, and we are the top team in Tulsa. We sell more homes than anybody else, which means that provides better strategies for you, and we can help you throughout the entire process. And so it's just like little bitty things that we're trying to do. We have a saying too that you should practice your skills on each other. You should not be practicing your skills on the client. And so if a client asks you a question and you're not prepared to answer that, it's because you haven't practiced enough with somebody else to be able to articulate the value that you have. So I know we've said articulate the value like 80 million times, but I feel like that should be the name of the game at this point.
Hashtag.
Yes.
That's good. Yeah, so Tara, we had a long conversation about this too. Let's speculate a little bit. What do we think the listing agent, buying agent relationship looks like in 18 months? What do you think, when the dust settles and all this is we're all practicing normal and crazy stuff happens for 12 months, but in 18 months, how does it settle? How do you think people are treating commissions and cooperation agreements in 18 months?
If I had to speculate, I would think that a lot of people are going to join teams. I think teams are going to get a lot bigger. I think that because I think that you're going to need the experts that have done this for a really long time and that are doing a lot of business. You're also going to need a team that has a lot of listings, so you make sure that you're going to get paid. That is what I speculate. I mean, I'm saying that because I have a team, obviously, but I hear that within the industry. Every big coach right now, I mean, I coach with a couple different coaches, so does my husband and my daughter. And they're all saying that they believe teams are going to get bigger and bigger.
Yep.
I also think that open houses are going to probably be the best way for you guys, the buyer's agents, to pick up clients right now. And we are seeing so many, because the buyers that are savvy enough to know what's going on in the news, we are seeing so many buyers come to open houses, and we're selling a ton off of open houses.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I think and to kind of close this up, I think we can't forget this whole thing is to put the consumer first. And I think agents are kind of scrambling around. How does this affect me? How does this affect how I get paid? Is my commissions going to go down? Am I going to have to fight or whatever? And you cannot forget to put the consumer first. If you provide a good consumer experience with no friction, as much as you can, you're going to continue to win, however that looks like in your own business. But I think the more we panic and try to create weird processes or try to get cute, I think all we're going to do, Tara and I talked about this, we're just going to drive buyers into dual representations. If we make it hard to work with a buyer's agent, then they're going to stop working with buyer's agents.
I don't think that's in their best interest.
It's not. It's definitely not in their best interest. I think everyone should have their own representation for multiple reasons, but that's what will happen. If I try to go into a house and some guy makes me sign a marriage certificate with him, then I'm going to stop calling people, and I'm going to go straight to the sign, straight to the house, straight to the open house. And so I think the more difficult we make this, the more friction we put in it, those fears do become realized that everyone's worried about. So be consumer minded. Make it smooth, easy for them, provide value to them. Again, you shouldn't have to explain how you provide value, show them how you provide value. Yeah. Any other finishing thoughts? No, I look like you almost had something. Okay.
I was thinking about that pre-approval thing that we were talking about, how agents out there are like, you got a pre-approval letter? I'll show you the house if you got a pre-approval letter. It's going to be the same thing. They're so insulted when we say that, like, are you sure you can buy this house? So I think it's kind of going to be the same thing. So we're going to have to figure out a way to make sure we're not being like, no, I'm not going to show it to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of realtors who will get a phone call, sign call or lead online or whatever, and they're going to be like, email me a pre-approval. I'm not going to waste my time. I'm worth more than this, or whatever you want to say. And that is the definition of friction in the process. And so build that rapport first, provide value first. Exactly.
And also, how are we going to handle